You are now entering the memory mortuary, where your childhood is reflected, bisected, and dissected before being laid to rest. So let's see what's on the slab for our morticians today on this episode of The Memory Mortuary.
Is that a goldfish?
No, I promise you. It's a cherished childhood memory. To someone.
How do we perform an autopsy on a goldfish?
Well, last night I put this fish in a glass of water, and if I'm following the directions right, then pretty soon it will morph into its true form.
Come on, man.
Shh, shh. Here it is. It's morphing.
Ew.
Haha! At last it has morphed!
No, it's stopped.
Just give it a second. It's probably buffering or something.
No, it stopped. Look, we have a half fish, half middle-aged man on the slab, and I'm not getting my hands dirty with this one. This is all you. Do you even know the name of this thing?
I do, but we'll need to call in an expert to really help us get to the bottom of what this memory was.
Andreas, there are 4 other dead animals laying on these slabs. Who are these people?
They are the Animorphs.
Welcome back to the Memory Mortuary. I am your host, Mortician Andreas Marangos, and joining me today is, of course, your co-host, Mortician Gabe.
Hello.
I also have with us today an archaeology student and Animorphs expert, unrelated, Kate. We thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I love talking about Animorphs, and excited to be able to talk about Animorphs with a platform.
Awesome. This is why we exist. Well, we're looking at the cadaver right now, which is Animorphs. And I usually, at the beginning of these episodes, give a brief 1 or 2 sentences from the great archives of Wikipedia on what Animorphs was. And from what the internet wants to tell us before we turn to our expert. It's that Animorphs is, not was, which is interesting, Animorphs is a science fantasy series of children's books written by Catherine Applegate and her husband Michael Grant, writing together under the name K.A. Applegate and published by Scholastic. Published between June 1996 and May 2001, the series consists of 54 books and includes 10 companion books, 8 of which fit into the series continuity, and 2 that are game books not fitting into the continuity. We'll get into what any of that means with our expert. So could you tell us in your own words what Animorphs was?
Yeah, so Animorphs was the love of my life from between the ages of maybe like 7 and 11. And it was this incredibly long series of books that centered on 5 kids and their alien friend who were teenagers or about 13, and they would fight an alien invasion. It was a stealth invasion of brain-stealing worm aliens called Yeerks. Who could...
It's already the best thing I've ever heard of.
It was great. So it was like, it's one of those things that sounds ridiculous, but then you're reading it and go, this is eerie, because what the Yeerks would do is that they're these 3-inch long gray worm aliens that crawl inside your ear and wrap around your brain and can control you. And that's how they take over planets. They infiltrate. That was the word they kept using, infiltrate. And they infiltrated by taking over people until they had a critical mass of people, and they've taken over the planet. And so they did it with several other species by now, and their next target was Earth and humans. And so these 5 kids were walking home from school one afternoon, and they came across this other alien who had crash landed on Earth, and he was an Andalite, and they were the enemies of the Yeerks, and they had been fighting the Yeerks to stop them from spreading. And this Andalite gave them powers to acquire the DNA of, and then be able to morph into that animal, and that was how these kids could fight the Yeerks and protect the Earth. And so
I have a legit question in regards to that. So he gives them the power to transform. How does that work? I mean, it works through science, like you said, but in this way, do the kids Like, can the kids transform into anything and they choose to transform into animals? Or is it like they can only transform into the animals that they touch? Or is it...
That's
how-
right. So
Okay.
yeah, what they do is that they have to touch the animal to use this morphing technology to acquire its DNA, and then they can
Okay.
choose to turn into that animal anytime they want.
So, if I could ask, what is the most wild, intense animal that anyone has turned into? Because I want to know is how do they get their hands on like a lion? And
One of the main characters, her family, like her mom, is a high-ranking official at the local zoo, which is very convenient.
Okay.
So they can get in behind the scenes whenever they need to. It comes in handy a lot when they want to turn into, yeah, one of. They all have their signature animals that they turn into. So Jake, who's the leader, turns into a tiger, and Rachel, who's like the big badass fighter one, turns into a grizzly bear, and Marco, who's like the funny one, turns into a gorilla, and Cassie, who's like the nice one, her family works at the zoo and runs an animal rehabilitation in their home. She turns into a wolf, and Tobias, who probably my favorite character, actually turns into a hawk, and actually early on he gets stuck as a hawk, and he goes the rest of the series where the hawk is his new form now.
So I'm looking at the list here, and I see 54 books and 54 different covers of children transforming into animals in very horrific ways.
It's great. They're
So
iconic.
yeah, they are, and that's like, you can show this to someone from a generation before ours, and they don't know what they're looking at. And you could probably show it to kids now, and they wouldn't know what they're looking at. But if you show it to anyone within our age demographic, we immediately know this is an Animorphs book, even if we've never read one in our lives.
oh yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I remember seeing these things at every single one of those book events, book fairs.
The
at
Scholastic
school.
Book Fair.
Yeah, they were.
That's how they were like mostly published.
Oh yeah. As soon as I saw that they were published by Scholastic, I was like, that explains a lot of things, because they were just everywhere, and it was insane to see how long they stuck around, and and to see how many they had. It's like you couldn't go anywhere without seeing them in those weird
Yeah, and it's
covers.
funny because they were a little bit before my time. I got into them when I was 7 or so,
Okay.
so in 2003-ish.
Okay.
So they had stopped publishing by then, and I discovered them in used bookstores and the library, and that's how I got into them.
We discovered actually yesterday, we were talking about Bratz in the previous episode, and we talked about how Bratz kind of came and went, but then when they started to get resold at your local thrift stores, that perhaps they were finding new life in that way. And so I'm imagining Animorphs in that same way, where like they came and they went, and then after they went, like there's a whole new group of people who are like, oh, look at these weird, interesting covers that I'm
It's
finding at the
true.
new bookstore.
It's true, and they really did kind of have a staying power because they were everywhere and because they were part of that late 90s, early 2000s zeitgeist.
Yes, I live for this stuff. And quite frankly, I will probably die for this kind of stuff as well. So one thing that I like to sort of offhandedly collect, I don't hunt them, but when they come into my life, or if they show themselves, I take them and I add them onto the shelf, is Goosebumps covers. And I like Goosebumps as what it was. And one of the things that as an adult made me go back and say, hey, you know what? I run into these things every once in a while at like, secondhand stores or during the summer when there's a yard sale down the street. And they have numbers on the sides, on the spines. And one of the things that they were doing when you look at the ads inside is they talk about like, try to collect them all, collect all the stories. I'm noticing Animorphs is doing the same thing because I have an image of them, of all their spines lined up with all the numbers across. And it does something for my undiagnosed OCD that just fulfills me. I just love to look at the full collection.
And it's true, and they're all like have very prominent numbers on the spines, and I have about 30
Okay.
30 some of them. So I don't have all of them, but I see them all lined up and it's very satisfying. They all that children's book series style where the format and layout is exactly the same and it's very satisfying to look at them all in a row.
Gabe, I think we talked about this before, maybe not on the podcast, but I believe we talked about the artwork of covers, like how in certain way, like the covers of books and the covers of video games, and how there's something sort of really, I don't know, unfulfilling about them now compared to the way they were.
Oh yeah, they're not as gripping.
There's something beautifully uniform yet different for each and every one of these covers, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh yeah, they're definitely different. I'm actually looking at a list of them. It's hard to believe that some of these are covers. I honestly feel like I'm being pranked because it's
Well,
like, why would you...
Name a few. What are you looking at here?
The beauty of Animorphs that they started in the mid 90s and went through the late 90s into the early 2000s when CGI was new and very exciting. And
Yes.
so this was high tech. This was exciting. Look at the beautiful CGI blending human and animal.
Yeah, well, it's weird because this is a book aimed at kids, and I would take a cover, like as a kid, I would be like, okay, I'll be accepting of a cover where maybe it's a portrait of a kid, and it's down the middle of a line, and the other side is the animal. But this is, here's a kid on all four, and then here he is slowly morphing. Like here's phase 1, he's growing antennas, and phase 2, his spine is hunching more, and he's getting bigger eyes, and it's horrifying. And then eventually he turns into a cockroach from this one image, and it's so unbelievable and terrifying. It's some of the, like, oh god, I would have just cut out the middle part and said, here's the kid and here's the end product, but here's the in between horrifying stuff of them transforming, and it's scary.
Yeah, I have the one here where the girl's turning into a dolphin and her face is getting longer and longer.
So I only ever read one of these before. I don't even think I finished it. I might have been in the second grade, so they were really big. I don't even know when I had.
They're thin books. They're not long books.
No, they weren't long, but it had completely. I'll tell you why I didn't finish it. So the one that I had encountered, now that I have research and the internet in front of me, I attempted to read The Sickness, which is the 29th book.
Not a good place to start.
The cover gripped me because it's this, I believe, a young girl who transforms into what looks to be a prehistoric fish thing. Okay, so Wikipedia is telling me she's transforming into a yeerk.
Oh, yeah, that one.
So
That's what
I
yeerk
looked
looks like.
at that- when I looked at that right there, I went, "This is great. I am so into whatever this weird alien prehistoric looking thing is." And I remember reading about 5 pages, and the first 5 pages or so were all about what it was like to live as a blind crawling thing, and she's like describing how she can't see but she can taste and this and that. And it was just like, I remember reading it and just getting so unsettled by it that I put the book back into the, there used to be a library book drop-off thing in our elementary school.
Ah, yes.
And you had one in each class. I just took it and I just chucked it right into the bucket because I was like, I can't do this. It was freaking me out.
Yeah, it sounds like a beginner's book for I have no mouth and I must, what is it? I have no mouth and I need scream or something? I forgot the name. It sounds like that.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what was so powerful about Animorphs, what made these books take off the way other, kids fighting crime, kids fighting aliens, kids saving the world books didn't. The Animorphs books really leaned into the horror, the disgustingness, the bizarreness, and the existential pressure of being a child fighting a guerrilla war against an enemy too big for you to ever really succeed against. That was the premise of the Animorphs. They weren't supposed to win the war against the Yeerks. They were supposed to hold out and slow the invasion until the actual alien forces could arrive. But as the series went on, the Andalite forces who were supposed to rescue them never arrived, and these kids got more and more battle-hardened, scarred. They did war crimes, they grappled with PTSD, and they got really kind of horrifying by the end of the series, where these kids were like transformed into really tough guerrilla soldiers who lost their social lives, they're alienated from their families, made moral calculus about sacrificing people's lives to try and save the world. And
I have the biggest smile on my face right now because this flat out sounds like War and Peace, and I want to read this so bad.
And at the same time, it was about children transforming into animals, and it was so incredibly 90s with its pop culture references and kids trying to be cool.
I need to see whether or not it's legal to do a live reading of this. Because at this point now, you've convinced me that the world needs a live audio reading from book 1 to book 50 whatever. Like this is an epic unsung for this modern generation. From what you're telling me, you've sold me on Animorphs, and I haven't even gotten to my real questions yet. I'll be honest. I thought Animorphs was a sort of a young adult children's we're dealing with young people problems, and my mom took away my Nintendo. What are we gonna do? I don't know. Let's go play in the woods. Oh God, a bear. What are we gonna do? I'll fight the bear. Form of a hawk and form of a lizard. Like that's what I thought it was. But what you're telling me here is that it's the greatest battle to have ever been held.
See, what I saw it
Pretty much.
as a kid, you saw it completely different. Apparently, I never read the books. I only ever looked at the covers. At the time when I was young, whenever we went to the book fair, I was like, all right, I'm getting whatever book they have on Bionicles. That I'm getting, and I just skipped all the Animorphs. But looking at, I always remember the covers, and the first thing that came to my mind was, I thought, okay, is this a horrifying story of a kid accidentally turning into an animal, and he has to live that life, or he has to try to find out how to turn back? That's what I thought it was. I thought it was a sort of horror story, because that's what the cover makes it seem like, to me at least.
Like
it seems like a curse, and they're like, oh no, like this is a weird, Goosebumps book. It's so scary. And looking at it now, some of the covers still are really unsettling. But now that you gave us some of the backstory, it's like, okay, I guess now this isn't as creepy and weird, and now it makes a little more sense. And because they really don't look startled, though. They don't look like they're freaking out in the cover changing, but it's still really weird.
It seems to me like, Gabe, perhaps we were, pun intended, and this is very terrible joke, we judge books by their covers.
Yes.
And we should have picked up Animorphs #1, not number 29 like I did. We should have picked up Animorphs #1 and followed the greatest forgotten war. Well, I guess it's not that forgotten because we have a scholar with us right here on the podcast. But if I didn't know, Kate, that you had all this knowledge about Animorphs, if I hadn't found this out to contact you, I don't know if I ever would have found anyone else to tell me about all this.
It's funny, nearly everyone I knew was at least aware of Animorphs, and I feel like it was part of our kind of collective consciousness, but no one else was into it at the same level that I was. I have a couple of friends who are into it at the same level as I was, but mostly it was just kind of a pervasive presence in people's lives.
Yeah.
I'm gonna end up reading these things. There's no way around it. I can't not think that by the end of this week I'm going to go on Thrift Books and get the first one and realize it's for children and realize I'm not going to find it as interesting as it sounds. But
that's the thing, right? Because they were written for children, and I remember them really fondly as, gripping war dramas, but written in a tonal sense, like kids' books with goofy onomatopoeias and they shot at us like pew pew, and they. But at the same time, you have the books also vary wildly in tone. And say they were written by Catherine Applegate and her husband isn't entirely true, especially as the series went on. More of them were ghostwritten, so the styles vary wildly. I think the early ones and the endings were definitely written by Catherine Applegate, and then in between it can be shaken up who was actually writing them. And so the styles vary a lot, the tone varies a lot, and you have the Animorphs try to infiltrate Area 51 and see what the alien tech is there so that the Yeerks don't get it, and it turns out to be a huge joke. But then you also get ones like the Animorphs capture a resupply ship full of Yeerks and debate whether to vent all of their helpless prisoners into space, which is a war crime.
Gabe, which one did you write?
Probably the dolphin diving one.
The dolphin diving one. No, that just sounds. No, what's making me smile a lot is that, Kate, from what you're sharing with me, they sound like Star Trek episodes.
Kind of, yeah. Like
they sound like, hey, we're gonna debate war crimes in this one, and this one's gonna be a weird, jokey episode, and this one's gonna be this, but there's always a moral connection or a question about humanity and what it means to be human. That's what I'm getting from what you're telling me.
Yeah, and like that was definitely very much a part of the spirit of the books. Like there's so many Star Trek references in the books, by the way. The kids are nerds because the writer was apparently a nerd, and so they keep making jokey references to Star Trek. But you can definitely feel the Star Trek spirit in it in some ways, both in the format of the episodic, but linked by an overarching premise and ongoing progression of the story, but also in the just real diversity of aliens that exist in this universe. This was probably so formative to me because this is my first time I really delved into sci-fi that kind of opened up the universe. There are so many different alien species, each with their own planets and cultures and reasons for existing in this universe, and Earth was just kind of a small part of it in the grand, like, galactic interspecies political world.
This is that is so. This is just very interesting to me. I can't help but just start to wonder all different things. One of the big things I'm wondering is I'm looking at Wikipedia here, and it says they were adapted into a television series on Nickelodeon from '98 to '99. You have some explaining to do.
Yes. So
why have I never seen it? Because
because it was bad. Like, that's the thing.
I was probably consuming more television as a child at that time period than any other child on Earth. And for some reason, I have no memory of an Animorphs television. Was it live action? It
was live action, and it ran for one season and never got renewed. Because here's the thing: remember how I said that CGI was very new and very exciting? It's also very expensive and very ugly. And
trust me, I love watching Beast Wars, so I am familiar with which actually brings me to something else I just want to sort of mention, is that I do have to admit there's one other connection I have to Animorphs. There is. And the one is that book that I never finished. The other is I was very much into Transformers Beast Wars. And I was obsessed with it during the late 90s into the 2000s. When the 2000s came around, I jumped right onto the Transformers Armada wave and all. Totally getting off topic a little bit. But how it relates back to Animorphs is the Transformers Beast Wars toys were robots that transformed into animals. Well, in the same toy aisle, almost beside them, there were Animorphs toys, which were animals that turned into little kids. And there was a
didn't look good at all.
No, they didn't. There was a year. There was a year where I asked, my parents, my uncles, my family, the number one thing I wanted for, I forget which holiday it was. I'm almost certain it was a birthday. I really wanted Megatron that turned into the T-Rex. I did end up getting it that birthday, but not until after I opened a T-Rex Animorph. And I remember being a kid and looking at it, and I'm going, oh no, I'm not getting Megatron. Instead, I've gotten this. And it was like,
wow,
this red, like, T-Rex with, like, this, it had, like, I think, like, a black spotted back or something. And I remember opening it up and trying to, quote, transform it. And I'm pretty sure it transformed into multiple children.
That's disturbing.
But I remember
That's
feeling
weird.
I have a weird subconscious instant dread when I see Animorphs. Because I have that memory of, oh my god, I got the wrong toy. And which is very first world. And it's very it's
That's
very
hilarious,
stupid.
though.
Yeah, so that's really when I look at Animorphs, that memory comes back immediately. So, Katie, did you have any of those?
I didn't. I saw
okay.
them at one point. I remember the girl who turns into the wolf, seeing a toy of that, and just was very unimpressed with how the toy looked when she was a girl, because you could clearly see the wolf bits kind of like awkwardly folded in and sticking out, and like it didn't look good. Like, the beauty of Transformers is that they can look like robots, and they can look like dinosaurs, and they can look like cars, and they all kind of have the same aesthetic, but you can't really make a semi-realistic human transform into a semi-realistic wolf as a plastic toy. It just doesn't work.
It just don't work. It just doesn't.
I mean, I'm looking at the toy for the Cassie Wolf one, and she's incredibly bulky. I can't tell the packaging if they were like, here, we built her halfway between wolf and human, because she looks like she's in a giant fursuit, and her head is incredibly small compared to everything else. And I guess it also comes
exactly.
with and it comes with attachable arms, because I guess they're like, okay, we can't give her the claws, because it says Cassie/Wolf with breaker claws that go on, and I see it also comes with the alien, the Yeerk, and those are kind of creepy looking. I mean, they just sort of look like horseshoe crabs, I guess. I don't know. They're very strange. They remind me of they're really like the and you said they go into people's brains in their like head and then wrap around their brain and control them, you said?
That's right. That was how the Yeerks worked. That was kind of their modus operandi.
How big were they? Were they pretty small? Like
pretty small. Like, I think they're usually described as about 3 inches long.
Okay, yeah, they remind me of you know this, Andreas, the Rakshi from Bionicle, the enemy villain ones. Yeah, that have the worm brains in them.
The worm brains.
It sounds like that. Also, sounds like Alien Covenant.
And Wrath of Khan, I think of.
That's right. The worm brains that controlled them.
Yeah, Wrath of Khan. So. I think honestly, that's kind of a staple of science fiction, though.
Yeah, some sort of alien thing crawling into your ear, and then yeah. It's very
cool.
It's cool and also terrifying, especially for a kid's book.
Definitely.
Going back to the question, I have to ask, who was the alien guy? You said that they meet an alien. What was his name?
Oh boy.
That's right. So the alien that they meet who gives them their powers is named Elfangor. He is an important military leader in the fight against the Yeerks. But they're joined in their adventures by Elfangor's younger brother, Aximili, who they call Axe. And he becomes the 6th Animorph who like fights alongside them, and any books with the blue Centaur alien on the cover, that's Axe.
That's what that's what I needed to know, because in preparation for this episode, for this interview with you, I tried to investigate Animorphs in what ways I could, and in what ways I could was to play the Animorphs game on the Game Boy Color.
That I wasn't even aware of.
Okay, so I played that for a bit, and here's what I was able to gather. It had 5 stages when it was designed, and they cut out the 5th one because they couldn't finish the game. You can still access the 5th one by putting in the correct passcode, but there's no ability to save, and you're given like it's all screwed up.
That sounds about right for a 90s Game Boy tie-in game.
Yes. Yeah. It was created by Ubisoft, and the 5th stage was you playing as the 4-legged centaur alien thing.
All right, that makes sense.
And so the other 4 you were playing as the kids, and it was a Pokemon knockoff where you were the kid, and then you'd go and you encounter animals, and you'd have to defeat them so you would be given one animal. So you'd start as a mouse or a snake or whatever, and then you'd go and you'd have to go defeat a monkey, and then a monkey would get added to your roster of potential things you could transform into. You could only have 6 things you could transform into, so you had to like pick and choose.
You can see more Pokemon inspired than
It is.
book inspired.
Exactly. It's very much you going around catching animals and then becoming them and then trying to fight alien monsters, which I have to be honest, I didn't know Animorphs had anything to do with aliens. So when I saw that while playing the Game Boy game, I thought that Ubisoft was just messing like with the lore.
Taking
I thought
some liberty creatively.
Yeah. In the same way
aliens
that
are very important to the central conceit.
I had no idea. I thought that was completely made up in the same way that when you play the original Star Wars game on the NES, Darth Vader turns into a giant scorpion monster. Like,
I'm sorry, he what?
They had to spice them up, and so when you encounter Darth Vader, he turns into a Darth Vader scorpion monster that you have to beat because they wanted more something. So I thought it was that. I thought it was like, oh, we need them to do something, so we're going to introduce aliens into the video game. I didn't know it was such an integral part to the lore. I'm shook today. I'm changed as a person.
I'm shook.
That's incredible. But yeah, these things, I guess I can't say they surprised me, though, because Animorphs was very much trying to be a franchise. In the back of the books, there are all sorts of advertisements for toys and tie-ins and all sorts of things that you could buy, because despite being like a really hard-hitting story about the fighting of a war and the results of being a soldier in an endless war, it was also aimed at bilking money from children.
And still capitalist nonsense, which I love. And we talk about this a lot on the show, where our age range were the targets of incredibly intense advertising, children's advertising, and
True.
There were meaningful things to come of that, because there's two ways to look back at your memories. This is a memory morph. There are two ways to look back at your children's memories. You can look back at your, the Transformers or the Animorphs or whatever it is, and you can get a little cynical about it and be like, some dudes in a boardroom came up with this, and they were just stamping those books out. They were ghostwriting them. Nothing mattered. You can look at it that way, and there is an element of that. But then there's also the art to it, and then there's the care put in by the people who actually have to sit down and write the thing. Or they actually have to sit down and they're tasked with, hey, listen, we really like the way that Transformers is going right now. Do you think you can transform these children into animals with no budget to create the toys? Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'll do my best. Like, people are trying their best, even if the people pushing for it are really just looking to milk the money. There is a middle ground in being able to appreciate these things.
It's true. And I think with Animorphs, they ended up overall telling a story that was, greater than the sum of its parts, and it, sticks with me. I think it was extremely formative to the kind of stories I eventually getting into, the kind of sci-fi I ended up really sort of dedicating myself to in the future. And it ended not pandering at all. Like, the series, as it towards
You're
the
actually
end,
answering my next question, which is, how did it end? Gabe, do you want to know?
Yeah, because I think the ending is a really important part of what made Animorphs what it was.
Okay.
So
let's hear it.
So when I was a kid, I read most of the books, not all of them. They were kind of based on whatever availability I could get them. Mm-hmm. Except that my library did have a lot of the very last books, and I tried to read them, and I could not. They were so dark, they were so upsetting that I could not actually bring myself to keep going.
It's like the opening to Saving Private Ryan, but with aliens. Like, guys thrown up over the side of them. Yeah, they're thrown up over the side of the barge. One guy's hopping around with one leg. I don't know why I am laughing.
No, you got later books had things like the war kind of coming out into the open when it was like secret. The keeping the secret for the whole series was like kind of a big recurring theme. But by the end of the story, the war kind of came out into the open. The Animorphs were recruiting kids as basically like suicide bombers to go in and hit no, for real. Like, it got like they were making these. They were basically recruiting kids who were terminally ill or had no future or had no home and said, hey, do you want to join this fight against the aliens? Probably
I'm
die
sorry.
but save the Earth.
Kate, I gotta stop you. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but okay, you are pulling our legs, right? This is like you're tricking us.
No, this is like where I had to stop when I was like 9 because this was too upsetting to me. When I got to the very end, like
This
I did
is absurd.
eventually read the last book where, all right, this is going to take some setup. So in the very first book, the main character is Jake, and the books sort of alternate different viewpoints in each book, but it starts and ends with Jake, and he's kind of the de facto main character. He's the leader of the Animorphs. He's the guy we start with, the guy we end with. And in the first book, he learns that his brother is being controlled by a Yeerk and is in fact being controlled by a Yeerk who's like fairly important in the Yeerk hierarchy. And so throughout the entire series, he's sort of faced with this moral dilemma of like, what do I do about my brother? Do I kill him? Can I try to save him? Like, how does this work? What's going to happen? His cousin is Rachel, and she becomes the real sort of DPS, as it were, damage dealer. She's the one who does a lot of the heaviest fighting. As the series goes on, she kind of goes completely off the rails. She like actually starts to kind of lose her mind to the berserker rage, and she can never go back to being like a normal kid. And so at the end of the series, she basically takes it upon herself to kill Jake's brother, who has risen through the ranks of the Yeerks, and then she dies in the process, but ends up like ending the war. And so the war is over. They've kind of started come down from fighting the Yeerks. They've driven the Yeerks off planet. The Andalites have finally arrived. The Yeerk hierarchy is dead. Rachel is dead. And then the very last chapter cuts to a couple of years in the future where they're fighting a totally new alien enemy that came out of nowhere, unconnected to anything else that had happened.
War never changes.
Like, actually, I think that is the theme. And the very end is they fly a spaceship into the alien like carrier ship coming to bring troops to new alien troops to invade Earth in a big suicide kamikaze ending, and that's how the series ends.
It sounds like Independence Day.
It was a shock. It was a whiplash. It was like, you can't that be how it ends.
This sounds more like an HBO series than it does a children's book.
It kind of does. And K.A. Applegate released a statement afterwards when a lot of people were kind of upset with the way that this book ends, saying, like, did you think that this was going to have a nice, happy ending? A story about war. This is a story about how war ruined
George R. R.
lives.
Martin says about Game of Thrones. Like, this isn't what someone writing children's books should be saying. When you're writing your magnum opus that's meant to delve into the hearts of men and women and really capture what it means to be in war, like that I understand when you go with the grimdark, but not the things printed by Scholastic that toddlers are grabbing, like, because the covers have weird faces on them.
And that was kind of incredible. Like, there was moral, like, war leads to war, and war is horrible, and fighting, if that, like, fighting is what, like, continues to lead to this cycle of war, and it messes people up along the way.
She might be my hero, honestly. Like, this is
all these heavy themes that I never would have expected from Animorphs.
And that's why I think the time is perfect for an Animorphs revival. You know how all the things that millennials liked in the 90s are being brought back by like HBO and Netflix and whatnot? Yes. I think now we have better CGI, for one thing, bigger budgets. Like, the 90s show suffered from low budgets, bad alien designs, and horrible CGI. But I think we have the perfect time to bring this series back. It speaks to the kind of exhausting fight that will never end that we all sort of are feeling right now. And we have the technology to do it right.
Let's be real here, though. I think the only people that would pick something up like that would probably be Sci-Fi. That's the first television studio I think of that would air and make an Animorphs show. But
So
You
why?
know what? Sci-Fi Channel original TV shows are honestly so full of effort and heart. I would love to see a Sci-Fi Channel take on
I agree
the
with that.
Animorphs.
I agree with that.
they probably wouldn't
No.
sell out like the others. So yeah.
Probably.
Honestly, I don't know why HBO decided to go back to His Dark Materials and the Golden Compass when Animorphs is sitting here idly waiting for its opportunity.
Right?
Like Golden Compass, it had its shot, right? Let it go. No one's reading that anymore. Animorphs, that is what's thematically relevant to today's world.
I agree.
And I don't know how many people are going to listen to this. Probably, like, how many people are talking right now? 3? Probably 3 people will listen to this. But if you are listening to this and you have any ability to tell anybody of power or authority that we should be getting our Animorphs television series that delves into the themes that connect to us as a generation, please tell them.
So what you're saying is
Now
take to
is
the
the TV
streets.
zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Twitter
Safely and social
hashtags.
distance.
Yes, Twitter hashtags then Animorph reboot. All those sort of things. Get it coming back, and this time it can be even more dark and edgier.
It honestly doesn't even have to be more dark and edgy. They just have to be faithful to the books.
That's
Yeah.
true, but a lot of things that are remade today, they always have to be a little dark and edgier. But maybe Animorphs is already there, and maybe they'll have to tone it down a little. It's too
Maybe.
intense. This is shocking. I never would
you
have
know-
imagined this.
So I think I first discovered them as like at my after school program in 2nd grade. There was this little shelf full of books, aimed at kids, your Judy Blume and the Wayside School, and one of them had an alien on the cover. I'm like, that's interesting. And so I picked it up and I sat down and read it in one go. That was the Andalite Chronicles. My first book was actually one of the later spin-off books.
That's one of my later questions, actually. I'm not even going to jump there yet, but keep going.
But it jumped right into a world that it assumes that the reader was already relatively familiar with, because it assumed that you had read all the Animorphs books that introduced all these concepts. So it jumped right into this world full of Andalites and Yeerks and all of these aliens. And in that one, the main characters were the aliens rather than the humans. There's a human side characters that were brought along for the ride, but the story was really about the alien characters from before the Animorphs series took place. So I was jumped right into this intergalactic politics and still didn't shy away from the weirdness, because at the same time you had a goofy love story, you also had the main character's best friend getting turned into a 30-foot worm forever and getting stuck like that. And the characters trying to control a time machine that accidentally broke the universe and created a pocket universe that was like patchwork of different universes that mixed in bizarre and unsettling ways. And they tried to find the center while racing against time dilation that was gonna kill them if they didn't. And kill them with just time if they didn't do it quickly. And so it's just all of these different sci-fi concepts mashing against each other that all kind of were introduced slowly over the course of the series, but all sort of coming back as plot points in this spin-off. But it just threw me right in, and I was fascinated. Like, every time I thought about aliens before, it was kind of the idea of flying saucers coming to mess with humans. Like, this was the first time I ever thought about aliens as having their own reasons for existing. And I was just like, I have to find out what else is going on here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I can't help but want to ask this. I'm looking at 54 books in the main series.
Mm-hmm.
It said 10 companion books, 8 of which fit into the continuity. So there's something called Animorphs Chronicles and Megamorphs. You were just talking about Chronicles?
Yes.
What was Megamorphs?
So Megamorphs was... So the gimmick of the series is that each book was told in first person by one of the Animorphs. Mm-hmm. Megamorphs were longer books that were told in alternating points of view throughout the book.
Okay.
So they were sort of like extra special big editions that told a slightly bigger story from more points of view. There were 4 of those.
Okay.
So those fit into the main Animorphs series. It starred the same kids in the same situation, doing the same sorts of things. One of those had them go back in time to the time of the dinosaurs, and it was great. And that's probably where your T-Rex toy came from.
Thank you. It's all coming together now. You're answering everything, even things I don't even ask.
It's all
wonderful.
connected. Whereas
Okay.
the Chronicles starred characters who were not the main kids. There was the Andalite Chronicles that starred Elfingor, the alien who originally gave them their powers. There was Visser, who starred an important Yeerk character. One of the kids named Marco, his mother, was like the leader. They thought she died. Turned out she was actually the leader of the Yeerks because she got taken over years ago, and she's now like an important leader of the Yeerks. There's the Elemist Chronicles, which is about this super powerful, outside of time alien entity who shows up in the series occasionally to make things difficult for the kids. And then there's the Hork-Bajir Chronicles, which is my favorite book in the entire Animorphs extended universe. And I think to this day, it's still the Hork-Bajir Chronicles. It's not a different guerrilla war story. It's about a previous planet that the Yeerks attacked before Earth. And the planet actually lost, and the Yeerks like took over and enslaved all of the aliens called the Hork-Bajir. And so the story is from the perspective of people, aliens, alien people like fighting against the Yeerks in the invasion of their planet. But at the end, you know they lose. And that was really hard-hitting stuff for a book aimed at 12-year-olds, like these alien kids fighting this alien war against an enemy that we know our current crop of human kids are fighting, but you know that they end up losing.
There's so much to consume here. This is so expanding. Like, it just goes outward. I'm gonna... Gabe, do you still have up the list of Animorphs books?
I have the pictures of the covers because that's what always interested me.
That's what I'm looking at too. So let's play. I love playing a quick game really quick. If you had to say, let's say your top 3 favorite covers. Like Gabe and I will pick one cover that we think stands out to us.
Favorite covers.
Yeah, but you, having experienced the books, what would you say are your 3 favorite covers?
I have my books spread out in front of me here. Say a strong contender is number 17, The Underground. The girl, Rachel, turns into a bat, and her halfway point is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that is so great. Gabe, can you see it too?
Yeah, that halfway point is very, I don't know, it feels like something you'd see in a vampire B-movie.
Yeah.
It's very schlocky looking. I like it.
It's fantastic. All right, so there's one. Do you have 2 others?
Number 33, The Illusion, is extra fun because it has a hawk turning into an alien, so there's no humans involved, so the look is just kind of amazing. Then one that I think continues to haunt my nightmares sometimes is number 32, The Separation, where the girl, Rachel, again, why does she get the weirdest covers? I don't know. Turns into a starfish in the most disturbing way possible.
Yeah, that one is pretty horrifying.
It's very cone head for a little while.
Oh, that's giving me like a weird chill. Like, I don't like that at all.
This one also I'm fond of because it's a blatant ripoff of a classic TOS Star Trek episode plot.
That one is?
Yeah, it's really dumb too, but it's great. She turns into a starfish. The starfish gets one of its arms chopped off, and then both halves turn back into Rachel. So now there are 2 Rachels with a split personality.
Yeah. There's a
like,
moral dilemma on like humanity there. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, this one was less of a moral dilemma and more of just a little bit absurd throughout. So sometimes you get hard-hitting war stories, and sometimes you get, oh no, there's a mean Rachel and a nice Rachel, and we have to figure out how to like merge them back together.
Gabe, do you have one that stands out to you just from what you're looking at right now?
Well, I gotta say the most tame one definitely has to be the departure, where it's just a girl in a very ballerina-like pose, arms stretched out, and she just turns into a butterfly, and it's very tame. It's surprising I could find one that isn't terrifying, but for me, really, it's a tie between the reunion with the kid turning into a cockroach, and
That's pretty bad.
and the other, which is a kid turning into a bee, and he, of course, grows another pair of arms, and it's so weird. And
the second to last part of the transformation there, where he still has the human legs, but he has the bee body.
Yeah, it's
It's
really
unsettling.
weird. And I do love the quote on the front of it, or the little text, which is, "This is your brain. This is your brain with a yeerk. Any questions?" I like it.
I like that
So
too.
90s.
I'm gonna have to break my own rule here, and there are two. There's one I'm going to say. Number 34, the prophecy.
That's the one I was looking at too.
He's turning into a dragon or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Or
what
an
that
alien?
is. Yeah, I guess it's an alien, but it's got like a
Well,
giraffe long neck.
I do know
It's like
that-
a
Oh,
dinosaur.
that's a Hork-Bajir. That's
Okay.
alien species that crops up a lot in this
That's,
story.
The Hork-Bajir is a boss in the second stage on the Game Boy Color game.
Oh.
So that
That-
actually makes sense now.
Yeah.
She doesn't look much like that. You're seeing him from like a different perspective, like head on,
Top down.
and he looks a lot more like like straight ahead,
Oh.
and he looks a lot more like, remember that weird bug guy from Harvey Birdman?
Oh yes.
Attorney at Law, like
Yeah,
weird
yeah.
bug dude. He was also on the Brack Show. He looked a lot more like that on the video game. So if this is the Hork-Bajir, then Ubisoft really needs to fix itself.
Yeah.
They need to
When's
go-
Ubisoft gonna make a remake? Make a port of this Animorph game.
We need that. The other one that stood out to me here in an opposite way is, can we look at number 41, The Familiar?
Oh, right. That book was really bad and stupid and is widely regarded as the worst Animorphs book.
Yeah. Is he just turning into an adult male? What's
Yeah.
going on there?
It's Boyhood.
It's boy.
Yeah. It took 9 years.
It took 9 years to make this book. Yeah. This is the boyhood of
the kid.
Animorphs.
The Boyhood of
Turning into
Animal.
an adult version of himself, and that is the morph.
So how do you morph into an adult version of yourself besides just aging?
You wait.
It's the longest morph.
Yeah, I can anamorph into an older version of myself. I've already done it. Just show me how to change back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Come back to me in 10 years, and I will also have morphed. That is fantastic.
Also, I gotta say the book cover, the Discovery one, the way the kids posed and dressed reminds me of that old photo of The Rock.
Yes,
you
it's the
know, the
fanny
one with the
pack.
fanny pack. Yes, it looks like a younger version of that picture. Like it's The Rock.
That is The Rock. That was The Rock's first gig. Is that
Was in the
he was an
Animorphs
Animorphs
cover.
kid. Well, that raises a question that I don't know if Kate. If you could answer this, then I'm pretty sure that you need to get a key to the city. What happened to these kids?
The kids on the covers? Gosh,
Yeah.
I don't know, actually. I've never
They passed.
I've never known who the kids on the covers are, but clearly they
They
did a
didn't
lot of
cross them.
photo shoots.
They passed
Yeah,
the
you know-
threshold of the 2-hour limit, and now they're permanently that animal or alien.
Yeah, you know,
Oh no.
No one knows where they are now.
like if you look on the back of your Animorphs books right now and you read the fine print, it says name withheld upon request for the kids.
What if it was a parent that, was like, oh, I want my kid to be famous. I'm going to take, we're going to do a photo shoot. You're going to be like stock photo stuff. You'll be in like great things. And they turn out to be used in an Animorph cover. And it's like, oh yeah, we'd like to buy the rights for the picture of your son to use on our book cover. Oh, great. He's going to be on a book. He'll look great. And he's going to be morphing into an animal. And it's not what they expect. And it's like, oh
Yeah, and
no.
he's morphing into like a sewer rat or something. Like,
Exactly. Yeah. Because these photos could just be from a database, like some sort of. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll pay you some money. We just want the kid, and we're gonna touch up his face a bit.
like look at number 15 where he's diving into the water, but there's no splash effect.
Don't you just
Like-
love 90s CGI design.
Yeah, it was.
I live for this. This is amazing.
It's so creepy to me. The old CGI just had a weird clay-like look and wetness to it, like where it was so creepy. And I'm glad that the tech has gotten better.
I'm not.
It has charm to it.
Oh yeah. It definitely does have its charm. I feel that way every time I look at Donkey Kong Country. I'm like, God, this is so ugly, but unique. I'm a fan of these names. Hork Bajir.
Yeah,
I like that.
That is awesome. Gabe, you have the hammer and chisel, right?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You're ready. So Wikipedia wants to tell me that Animorphs lived and died from 96 to 2001. But being a friend of the deceased, how do you agree with that timeline, or do you think it should be altered in a way when we carve it into the tombstone here?
Well, the series itself stopped publishing in 2001, but there's still a semi-active Animorphs fandom on the internet if you know where to look.
Okay.
I believe it.
I do as well. Are you
the rest of the 2000s were kind of still Animorphs time even after the books stopped publishing.
Oh, are you comfortable with us putting from 1996 to 2001 on the tombstone?
I think probably its height of
I mean people like it is common for a cadaver to have a few years, if not a decade, of what is Gabe? What is it? Breakfast at Tiffany's? Why can't I ever remember the name of this movie? Bernie's
Weekend at Bernie's.
Yes.
Okay. I say this every time. I always forget the name, but it's not uncommon for a cadaver to have a year, if not 10 years worth of Weekend at Bernie's, let's say, marionetting across the world and throughout the lives of children. But I think I'm personally comfortable with Gabe carving in 96 to 2001.
Sounds about right. It definitely doesn't have the same cultural presence anymore as it did back when I was 8 years old.
Yeah, and there's one other thing that we do on this show. Now that we've examined our visitor, the corpse. I was trying to be respectful, Gabe. You're beloved. We usually have to declare whether or not the intellectual property was murdered or if it was natural causes. I'm particularly interested in what you have to say to this because I could see it going both ways.
I think I feel comfortable saying it was natural causes. It really hit the demographic hard that it was aiming for, but it's been nearly 20 years since the series ended, and the series did end on a kind of dramatic and disappointing note, but also tonally, thematically, that was kind of where it was always going anyway. Yeah. It had its moment in the sun, and I think it's fair to say, lay this to rest for, due to natural causes.
All right, and that kind of brings us into the very, very last thing. If you have any final words to say as a friend of the deceased to this beloved part of our generation, of your childhood, what would they be? What would be your final words to the let's say the intellectual property, let's say the identity of the thing?
Honestly, I think I would say this really defined my childhood taste, and really set in stone kind of my direction in the future, and I don't regret it at all. And I would like to thank Animorph for being there and for being wild and creative and dark and real and wacky and sort of showing me like what sci-fi could be. And honestly, a lot of children's books and YA books still don't quite measure up. Yeah,
that I thank you. Gabe, anything you have to ask?
No, it was
before we wrap up here?
It sounded great.
That was perfect. So, Kate, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
You are very welcome. And, if I happen to find out that you are an expert in anything else that Gabe and I have no clue
We'll give you a call.
We'll give you a call, because this was
Thanks.
fantastic.
Thank you for visiting the Memory Mortuary. Our guest today was archaeology PhD candidate at the University of Arizona and Animorphs expert, Kate. Our morticians are Andreas Marangos, Esquire, and the Hork Bajir known as Gabe. Our intro music was composed and performed by Christian Deknatel. Our cover illustrator and social media manager is Emily Barksdale, and that's me. You can follow us on Instagram at Memory Mortuary. Join us next week as we perform another autopsy here at the Memory Mortuary. We're sorry for your loss.